It began on the forgotten frontier world called Varnies 5, a place so far from the central trade routes that even star maps showed it as a faint gray dot, barely noticeable, barely remembered, a world the galaxy had left behind long ago. Yet now, fire swallowed the horizon as burning ships fell from the sky like dying stars, and the ground shook with explosions that cracked mountains open like weak shells. The Scar Dominion, those merciless conquerors with metal skin and glowing red eyes, had descended on the colony with overwhelming force, tearing through defenses, crushing cities, and leaving nothing alive that could raise a voice of resistance. The air tasted of smoke, metal, and fear, and every surviving Varney soldier ran through the collapsing streets with the same question pounding inside their skulls. Why isn't anyone coming to save us? They had sent thousands of distress calls to the Galactic Council, desperate messages begging for help, for ships, for soldiers, anyone. But no response ever came. No Council fleet, no Allied reinforcement, only silence, cold, painful silence. Deep inside the main command bunker buried under tons of reinforced steel, the colony's leaders gathered around a flickering table, their faces pale, uniforms stained with ash and blood, each of them shaking not from fear but from exhaustion so deep it felt like their souls were cracking. Generals argued in trembling voices. Scientists pressed buttons frantically on dead monitors. Civilians cried quietly in corners. The bunker walls vibrated from enemy bombardment above as the Scar slowly drilled their way toward them. Then Commander Teleran, the oldest soldier on Varnies 5, a man with silver hair and eyes full of battle scars, spoke the words no one wanted to hear. There is only one option left. The room froze. Every face turned toward the center of the table where a small metal case lay locked under 3 seals. The SOS beacon of Earth. A forbidden relic. A device older than their colony. A device tied to humanity, the one species the Galactic Council had warned everyone never to contact again. For 200 years, no one dared touch it. Some said it was broken. Some said it was dangerous. Some said calling Earth was the same as inviting death itself. But their world was dying anyway. Teleran placed his trembling hand on the case. "No one else is coming," he whispered. "If humanity ignores the message, then we die. If humanity answers..." He didn't finish the sentence. No one needed him to. Everyone in the galaxy knew the stories of Earth. The death world whose plants were venomous, whose oceans devoured fleets, whose storms tore cities apart, whose animals hunted humans like prey, and humans survived it all. Humans evolved through pain, disaster, and chaos, becoming the most unpredictable species ever born. They were called Deathworlders for a reason. Dangerous, uncontrollable, fearless. The Galactic Council had forbidden all contact with them after the last Terran War, sealing their borders and cutting all ties. Yet here they were, about to press the one button that might summon those very monsters. A technician whispered, "What if the stories are true? What if they come and kill us too?" Teleran closed his eyes. "The Scar will kill us anyway. At least humans might listen." The room trembled as a Scar plasma drill struck the bunker shield. Time was running out. Hope was dying. And in that moment of despair, Teleran unlocked the case. The metal lid creaked open to reveal a single round device. Ancient, rusted, small enough to fit in his palm, yet pulsing with a faint blue light, like a sleeping eye waiting to open. Every person in the bunker stepped back. The beacon felt alive. Waiting. Watching. Teleran hesitated for only a second before pressing the center. The beacon activated. A deep hum filled the bunker, vibrating through their bones. Blue light expanded outward, swirling into a sphere of energy that rose above the table, humming like a heartbeat. Then a voice, cold, mechanical, ancient, echoed across the room. Emergency channel recognized. Terran SOS protocol initiated. Everyone held their breath. The technician cried softly. Engineers covered their mouths. Civilians knelt as if facing a god. And then the message was sent. A single pulse of light shot through the ceiling, passing effortlessly through steel, earth, sky, and space. Across the galaxy, through abandoned star lanes and forgotten systems, past dark asteroids and broken satellites, The SOS beacon carried one message: Deathworlders, we need you. And then silence. Minutes passed. Then hours. The bunker shook again and again as scar drills cut deeper into the mountain. Soldiers gathered weapons for their final stand. Families huddled together. And the beacon remained silent, its single blue eye slowly fading. Many believed it had failed, that Earth was gone, that humanity didn't care. Or worse, humanity heard the call and chose to ignore them. But then, a low tremor rolled through the ground, not from scar weapons, but from something far away, something enormous. The bunker lights flickered. The walls groaned. Soldiers lifted their heads. Another drill? Someone asked. But Telleran's eyes widened. No. This vibration is coming from orbit. The communication screens, long dead from enemy interference, suddenly blinked to life for a split second, long enough to show a single star disappearing from view behind something massive. Then another star vanished. And another. And then the entire sky darkened as if someone had placed a gigantic wall in front of the planet. The tremor grew stronger, louder, heavier. The air itself felt like it was shaking. The bunker's outer sensors snapped online, picking up impossible readings, gravity waves, engine signatures so massive they overloaded the system, temperature spikes that made no sense. Then the technician screamed, Something huge just dropped out of warp. Before anyone could respond, every screen in the bunker turned bright white. Static. Then a shadow. Then a shape so large it didn't even fit on the screen. Terran Dreadnought. Then another. Then 20. Then an entire formation of colossal black warships emerged from warp, their hulls glowing with cold blue veins, each one built like a floating continent of metal and firepower. They moved in perfect silence, engines rumbling so deeply it made mountains tremble. Soldiers fell to their knees. Civilians cried in disbelief. The sky above Varney's 5 became completely dark as hundreds of Terran dreadnoughts filled the heavens, blocking out the stars entirely. No one spoke. No one breathed. The galaxy hadn't seen a Terran fleet in 2 centuries, and now an entire armada had arrived. The moment the Terran dreadnoughts arrived, the entire planet felt as if it had drifted into the shadow of a god, and every living soul on Varney's 5, soldiers, children, elders, medics, stood frozen as the sky turned black under the sheer size of the Terran fleet, each ship moving with a calm, terrifying confidence that made even the bravest hearts tremble. These were not ordinary warships. They were legends forged from the nightmares of old wars, silent giants that carried the scars of battles nobody dared speak about. Inside the bunker, Commander Telleran whispered with trembling breath, We awaken the Deathworlders. But before he could say more, a deep vibration rolled through the ground as thousands of Terran drop capsules armed themselves for deployment, each one glowing with cold blue fire. The Scar Dominion's warships immediately panicked, their formations breaking apart as their captains shouted over comms in fear they had never shown for any other species. And when the first wave of human drop pods detonated out of the Dreadnought's launch bays, streaking across the sky like falling stars, the battlefield below erupted with a thunderous sound that felt like an ancient beast roaring back to life. The Varney soldiers stared upward, tears forming in their eyes, because those falling pods didn't feel like reinforcements. They felt like judgment descending from the heavens. The drop pods slammed into the burning ground with force so brutal it cracked the earth, sending shockwaves that ripped through scar trenches and flipped armored crawlers as if they were toys. Smoke rose, fire hissed, dust choked the air, and then, silence. Thick, terrifying silence. The Varney's defenders held their breath as the pod doors slowly opened, steam hissing from the edges, and the first Terran soldiers stepped out, towering, armored, moving with deadly precision, their black armor glowing with the same cold blue veins as the dreadnoughts above, their visors shining like the eyes of predators watching prey for the final time. They didn't look around in fear or confusion. They didn't hesitate. They walked forward with the calmness of beings who had survived storms and creatures far worse than the Scar. Their movements were quiet, disciplined, efficient, almost too smooth for normal soldiers, as if each Terran had fought 1,000 battles before stepping foot on this burning world. The Scar roared in rage and opened fire, energy bolts slicing through the smoke, hammering the ground around the humans. But the Terrans didn't break stride. They advanced through the fire without flinching, without slowing, without fear, their shields absorbing blasts that would have killed any other species instantly. A Scar brute leaped forward, claws raised to slice a human in half, but the Terran simply caught the beast's wrist midair, twisted once, and snapped it like a twig before slamming the monster into the dirt with a single blow. The Varnese soldiers gasped. How could something so small defeat something so massive with such ease? And then they realized humans weren't small. Humans weren't weak. Humans were Deathworlders, beings forged in a world where every single day was a battle for survival. The Terran commander, his armor heavier, darker, bearing symbols from ancient Earth wars, stepped out of the largest drop pod, surveying the battlefield with eyes that felt older than the stars. His voice crackled across comms, calm and cold. Terrans, safeguard civilians. Neutralize Scar forces. Varnese 5 is under Terran protection. That single sentence shook the bunker like thunder. Varnese 5. Under Terran protection? No one had ever heard Earth claim responsibility for another world. Not since the old days. Tears filled Lyra's eyes, the young Varnese medic, who had believed her world would die. But now, watching the humans march into fire for strangers, she whispered, They didn't come to conquer. They came to save us? On the battlefield, Terran units moved like a single living organism, covering each other, dragging wounded Varnese soldiers behind their shield lines, patching bleeding civilians with medkits, and fighting the Scar with a rage so controlled it felt like poetry written in adrenaline and steel. A human soldier took a blast to the chest, fell to one knee, then rose again with a roar, firing back with deadly precision that cut down 3 Scar warriors instantly. Another Terran shielded a crying Varnese child with his entire body while calling in a medical drone to evacuate her. Everything the Varnese believed about Deathworlders, monsters, savages, uncontrollable killers, shattered as they witnessed a truth far more terrifying and beautiful. Humans were monsters only to the ones who threatened the innocent. Suddenly the Scar launched their heaviest war beast, a towering mechanical titan with cannons capable of vaporizing buildings. The Varnese defenders screamed. Even the Dreadnoughts above shifted position as sensors locked onto the titan. But the Terran commander simply raised one arm and ordered, "Stand back." The Dreadnoughts responded instantly. Their railgun barrels glowed blue. A deep hum filled the sky, and then, like lightning striking the planet, a single railgun round shot downward, moving faster than sound, faster than thought, ripping through the Titan's chest like it was paper. The Titan exploded in a shockwave of metal and fire that blew Scar troops off their feet. A Varnese general whispered shakily, We called for help, and Earth sent gods." But in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by fire and death, the Terran commander removed his helmet slowly, revealing a face carved by war, scars, steel eyes, determination so powerful it radiated like heat. He looked toward the bunker where the SOS beacon had been activated, and for the first time since arriving, he smiled. A tired, broken, human smile. "Varnese 5, he said softly into his comms. "Your call reached us. You are not alone anymore." And for the first time since the war began, the people of Varnese 5 finally believed it. The battlefield of Varnese 5 looked like the end of a nightmare and the beginning of something far more terrifying as the Scar Dominion reeled from the human arrival. Their once confident commander screaming orders in panic while Terran soldiers advanced through smoke and fire with the same cold focus as predators stalking wounded prey, and the Varnese defenders watched in stunned silence as Deathworlders fought with a calm intensity that felt almost inhuman. Terran shields absorbed blasts that would tear other species apart, Terran rifles fired with surgical precision, and Terran fists shattered armored Scar warriors like they were made of brittle stone. Yet beneath all that raw power, Lyra, the young Varnese medic now running between wounded soldiers, saw something else in the human's eyes, something deeper, something painful. These warriors were not enjoying the battle. They were surviving it, pushing through it, carrying the weight of 1,000 memories behind every strike. And when she saw a Terran soldier stop mid-fight to lift a wounded Varnese child, shielding him with his body as gunfire rained down, She finally understood the cruel truth of every rumor she had ever heard about humans. They were monsters only because their world forced them to be, but their hearts were something else entirely. The Scar, enraged by the humiliation, unleashed their elite hunter units. Faster, stronger, armored with biospines that crackled with red energy. They moved like shadows, leaping between burning debris, tearing through weakened defenders, shrieking in triumph as they approached the human lines. One hunter pounced on a Terran sniper, knocking him to the ground and slashing at his visor with claws that glowed red-hot. Lyra gasped, thinking the human would die, but instead of fear, the Terran sniper laughed, a low, exhausted laugh filled with something close to madness, grabbed the hunter's wrist mid-swing, and snapped it with a twist so brutal she felt sick. The hunter shrieked, but the human didn't stop. He slammed his blade into the creature's throat, stood up without hesitation, and simply whispered, "Next!" More hunters swarmed. The Terran commander stepped forward. His armor cracked, blood dripping down his face, one eye nearly swollen shut, and yet his posture remained unbroken as he raised his rifle and fired 3 shots so precise each hunter fell mid-leap before they even realized they were hit. The Varney's defenders watched him with a mixture of reverence and fear. This was no ordinary commander. This was a symbol, a living monster forged by Earth's merciless evolution, a man who looked at death the way other beings looked at rain. Familiar, unwelcome, but never surprising. But even he wasn't invincible. A Scar juggernaut, the largest of the hunter caste, charged toward him like a mountain of moving steel, roaring with bloodlust. The commander fired again and again, bullets sparking off the juggernaut's armor. But the creature didn't slow. It slammed into him, lifting him off his feet and throwing him across the battlefield into a broken wall. Lyra screamed as she watched him fall, his armor cracking further as he struggled to breathe. The juggernaut charged again, claws raised to finish the kill, but the humans reacted instantly. 2 Terran soldiers leaped onto the monster's back, stabbing through its spine with glowing knives, while another soldier ran at full speed and tackled its legs with a roar that shook the ground. The juggernaut stumbled, screaming, but didn't fall. It reached back, grabbed one of the humans by the neck, and crushed him instantly, throwing his body aside like a broken doll. Lyra's heart broke as she watched the Terran soldier collapse lifelessly, his armor still smoking. But the other humans refused to break. They attacked harder, faster, angrier, not for revenge, but because losing one of their own ignited something primal inside them, something that made Deathworlders terrifying even to monsters like the Scar. They fought like people who had spent their whole lives losing things but refusing to let grief kill them. The Terran commander rose again, coughing blood, his vision blurry, but his voice still strong. "Fall back to the line," he ordered, and the humans obeyed instantly. But the Varney soldiers didn't understand why. The humans were winning. The Scar were falling. Why retreat now? Then the ground answered the question. It trembled violently beneath their feet as something massive moved in the distance, bigger than any Scar beast they had fought so far. Lyra felt her chest tighten, her breath frozen. The Scar Dominion wasn't sending more troops. They were sending their champion beast, a creature bred only for worlds they planned to exterminate entirely. A monster taller than buildings, its body covered in flaming red armor, its roar splitting the sky as it approached the battlefield. The Varneys fled in terror. But the humans, they stood still. The champion beast roared again, charging forward like a living earthquake. The ground cracked beneath its steps. Fire burst from its mouth. And still the Terran commander walked toward it, alone, limping, bleeding, barely standing. Lyra watched him in horror. "No, no, he can't," she whispered. But he could. Humans always could. The champion beast swung its massive claw, large enough to crush a tank, and the commander barely dodged, the blow skimming across his armor and sending sparks flying into the sky. He staggered but didn't fall. He fired point-blank into the creature's eye, blinding it with a scream that shook the earth. But the beast retaliated instantly, slamming its fist into the ground, sending a shockwave that threw the commander backward like a ragdoll. The Terran soldiers roared in fury, raw, human, heartbreaking fury, and charged the champion beast as one. They climbed onto its legs, stabbed into its joints, fired into its open wounds, refusing to let the monster reach their commander. Every human fought like this was the last war they would ever fight. Every human attacked with the desperation of someone defending family. And for the first time since the battle began, Lyra saw the truth in their eyes. Humans weren't just fighting for Varnies. They were fighting for each other. Their unity was their weapon. Their rage was their armor. Their grief was their fuel. Finally, the champion beast staggered, falling to one knee. The Terran commander rose again, coughing violently, clutching his chest, but he still lifted his rifle, aiming at the creature's glowing core. His voice, cracked and trembling, echoed across the battlefield. "This is for my fallen," and he fired. The shot hit the core. The champion beast exploded in a wave of fire that lit up the sky, sending debris flying in every direction. The fall of the champion beast should have given Varnies 5 a moment of victory, a moment to breathe, a moment to feel that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was ending, but instead the battlefield grew unervingly quiet. A quiet so deep it felt like the planet itself was holding back tears, and the humans, battered and bleeding, instantly sensed something was wrong. Their instincts sharpened. By the horrors of a death world told them danger was not gone. It was growing. Smoke curled gently from the shattered earth, drifting between broken machines, corpses, and burning metal. And as the wind blew across the ruined valley, it carried a sound so faint that the Varnies' defenders didn't hear it. Whispers. Not words, not voices, just whispers of movement, like something crawling beneath the ground, something waiting. The Terran commander, barely standing after the fight with the champion beast, lifted his head slowly, the blue glow of his cracked visor flickering as he stared into the dark horizon. His voice, low and shaking from exhaustion, echoed across the comms. "All units, Titan formation. Something else is coming." The humans obeyed without a single question, pulling the wounded behind them, raising shields with trembling arms, dragging their dying comrades to safety even while their own legs threatened to collapse. Lyra watched this with a mix of heartbreak and awe. These warriors had lost so many already, and yet not one of them hesitated to protect the others. Varnies 5 had seen many species fight, but never had they seen soldiers who stood together like a single soul, refusing to let fear break them. The ground suddenly shuddered again, sending dust rising in waves. Varnies' soldiers stumbled, grabbing onto rubble for support. Then came another tremor, stronger, deeper, more violent. "Earthquake?" someone asked in panic. But the humans knew better. They stepped closer, forming a solid wall in front of the colony survivors, their bruised bodies glowing faintly from the energy signatures of their armor. The Terran commander whispered, almost to himself, "No, that's a burrower." Before Lyra could ask what that meant, the ground in front of them erupted with a deafening explosion as a massive scar tunneler burst through the surface, its armored segments spinning like drills, its mouth filled with saw-like mandibles dripping with acidic saliva. The tunneler screeched and unloaded dozens of scar infiltrators. Fast, thin, crawling monsters with long bone blades for arms, their eyes glowing with hunger. They swarmed the battlefield like a plague. The Varnies' defenders panicked. Some dropped their rifles. Others froze. But the humans moved, fast, precise, angry. Terran shields slammed into the ground, blocking the first wave. Blades flashed. Bullets tore through the infiltrators with perfect accuracy. One human soldier, despite a broken arm hanging uselessly at his side, used his remaining strength to grab a scar infiltrator by the throat and slam it into a rock with enough force to break stone. He didn't pause. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just kept fighting. But the infiltrators were endless. Dozens turned into hundreds. The tunneler kept spitting more onto the battlefield. The Terran commander ran forward, grabbing a wounded human by the shoulder and pushing him behind cover before firing a burst of rifle shots that blew off several infiltrators' limbs. But then one infiltrator slipped past the human shield line, silent, fast, deadly, and lunged straight toward a group of terrified Varnies civilians. Lyra screamed. The creature was too close. No human could reach them in time. But before the monster's blade struck, a Terran soldier, one of the youngest, barely more than a boy, threw himself in front of the civilians, taking the full force of the strike into his chest. The bone blades pierced through his armor, through his ribs, all the way through his body. Blood sprayed across the ground. The young soldier didn't even scream. He simply exhaled, grabbed the infiltrator by its skull, and snapped its neck with a final burst of strength before collapsing into the dirt. The Varney's children he saved cried out his name, reaching for him, but he smiled through blood-stained lips and whispered, "It's okay, you're safe now," before his eyes closed forever. Lyra fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had seen many soldiers die. She had lost friends, family, comrades. But something about watching a human boy die to protect alien children shattered her in a way she couldn't explain. Humans weren't supposed to care. Humans weren't supposed to bleed for strangers. But here they were, again and again, breaking every stereotype the galaxy ever believed about them. The Terran commander saw the young soldier fall, and his face transformed into something Lyra had never seen before. Not rage, not grief, but a deep, ancient heaviness that looked like the weight of 1,000 lost battles pressing down on him. Yet instead of collapsing, he stepped forward with renewed fury. He charged the tunneler himself, sprinting with all the remaining strength in his broken body, firing blast after blast into its spinning armor until he climbed onto its back and jammed his rifle all the way into the creature's core. The tunneler screeched, convulsed violently, and exploded in a shockwave that threw him across the battlefield. Humans grabbed him immediately, pulling their commander behind the shield line as more infiltrators crawled from the smoking crater. But even the sight of their dying commander did not break the humans' resolve. They fought harder, faster, more brutally, because that is what Deathworlders did. When they lost someone, they didn't retreat. They became unstoppable. And slowly, inch by inch, the infiltrator swarm began to thin. Human blood soaked the dirt. Scar corpses piled high. Varney's defenders watched with trembling awe as humanity stood alone against a nightmare, refusing to fall. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the infiltrator swarm weakened. The last Scar monster screeched as a Terran blade cut it down. Silence fell again. But this silence was heavier, sadder, full of ghosts. Human soldiers stood bruised, broken, exhausted, staring at the bodies of their fallen brothers. One human knelt beside the young soldier who died protecting the civilians, placing a trembling hand on his armor. The Terran commander, despite barely being conscious, forced himself to kneel beside him too. Humans bowed their heads, not in victory, not in triumph, but in mourning. The battlefield lay in ruins, the ground cracked open like broken glass, smoke rising in heavy gray pillars that swallowed the sky, and the surviving humans, bleeding, exhausted, armor shattered, stood in a tense circle around their fallen comrades, their breaths slow and heavy as if each inhale carried the weight of an entire planet. The Varney's defenders watched from a distance, unable to speak, unable to move, afraid to disturb the raw grief gathering around the Terran lines like a dark storm. One by one, human soldiers knelt beside the bodies of their brothers, placing shaking hands on cold armor, whispering promises that shook Lyra's heart even from far away. Humans mourned with a kind of quiet intensity she had never seen before. No wailing, no screaming, no breaking down. Instead, their sorrow burned silently, deeply, like molten steel waiting to be shaped into something terrifying. But even as they grieved, the Terran armor sensors pulsed red, warning them of new danger, and their commander, still barely conscious, forced himself to sit upright. His voice cracked and low as he whispered into the comms, "Prepare for second wave." Because Deathworlders understood a cruel truth the Varneys were only now learning. In war, grief was a luxury you could feel only for a few seconds before the universe demanded another sacrifice. The warning came too late. A deep metallic rumble rolled across the valley like distant thunder, growing louder, sharper, heavier with each passing second until the very ground beneath their feet trembled. Lyra clutched her medical bag with shaking hands. Varney's soldiers braced themselves. Humans looked toward the horizon with the cold readiness of predators returning to familiar pain. Then the city ruins began to shift, as if something enormous was crawling beneath them, and the cracked pavement exploded upward in a massive burst of debris. Everyone shielded their faces as dust and fire shot into the sky. When the smoke cleared, silence fell. And then fear followed. Not a single Scar infiltrator, not a tunneler, not a hunter, but an entire Scar execution legion, their armor black and spiked, their bodies pulsing with red energy veins, their faces covered in bone masks carved from the skulls of conquered species. They marched in perfect formation, thousands of them, each carrying weapons built to tear through starship hulls. Varney's soldiers nearly collapsed at the sight. These weren't ordinary troops. They were exterminators, sent only when a planet was marked for total destruction. If the Execution Legion had arrived, it meant the Scar Dominion had judged Varney's 5 unworthy of mercy. And yet the humans didn't move back. They stepped forward. The Terran commander, still bleeding heavily, raised his shaking hand, signaling his troops to form the shield wall again. His voice barely worked, but every soldier heard him. No one gets past us. The humans aligned shoulder to shoulder, shields locking into place, their armor bruised, their hands trembling, their breaths uneven, but their eyes, behind cracked visors, glowed with unstoppable determination. The Varney's defenders, overwhelmed by fear, could only stare. How can they still stand? Someone whispered. Lyra swallowed hard. Because they have to, she said softly. Because they promised us. The Execution Legion surged forward, weapons blazing red energy beams that cut into the ground like molten blades, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The human shield wall absorbed the first wave, but the force was so powerful it pushed even the strongest Terrans several steps back. A young Terran soldier cried out as his shield cracked, the energy beam burning straight through his armor, leaving a glowing wound that made him collapse to his knees. But before he could fall, 2 other humans grabbed him, pulling him behind the line, covering him with their bodies as they fired back at the Legion with flawless precision. The fight became a storm. The Execution Legion unleashed everything they had, energy cannons, plasma spears, spike grenades, and the humans responded with pure survival instinct, firing while moving while bleeding, their bodies enduring punishment that would kill any other species instantly. A Terran woman took a spike grenade to the chest, the explosion throwing her into a pile of rubble, but even as blood poured from the cracks in her armor, she lifted her rifle again and fired at the Legion, refusing to stop, refusing to die quietly. Lyra ran to her, kneeling beside her trembling body, trying desperately to seal the wound, but the human woman grabbed Lyra's wrist firmly and whispered through ragged breaths, "Help them, not me," and then pushed her hand away before rising again to fight. It broke Lyra's heart. These humans didn't care about their own survival. They cared only about protecting everyone else, even strangers. The Execution Legion closed in tighter, attacking from every direction with brutal precision. The Terran commander staggered, falling to one knee as blood dripped from his mouth. 2 human soldiers rushed to him, lifting him to his feet, refusing to let him fall. "Commander, you need medical." One started, but he cut them off with a fierce glare. "We stand," he rasped. "We hold the line." And so they did. Even when a wave of execution soldiers broke through and surrounded the humans, even when several Terrans fell under the weight of overwhelming strikes, even when their armor shattered and their weapons overheated, the Deathworlders pushed back with a kind of raw, unfiltered fury that shook the Legion itself. For the first time, the execution soldiers hesitated. They had killed countless species. They had exterminated entire planets. Yet here, on a dying frontier world, a handful of humans were holding them off. But the cost kept rising. A Terran sniper, shot through the shoulder, held his ground and kept firing until a Scar soldier slammed a blade into his spine. A human engineer shielded a group of Varney's children from an energy spear, taking the deadly blow himself. A Terran heavy gunner, bleeding from multiple wounds, kept firing his cannon until his legs finally gave out and he collapsed beside his weapon. And still, the humans refused to let their line break. It was not strategy. It was not pride. It was something deeper. Something born from a world where survival meant protecting the ones beside you no matter the cost. Finally, after what felt like hours of endless violence, the skies above Varnes flashed with a familiar blue light. The sound that followed was low, deep, and ancient, a hum that made the Execution Legion pause. Every human soldier lifted their head, eyes wide with recognition. Lyra looked upward in confusion. "What is that?" she whispered. The Terran commander inhaled shakily, tears forming in his exhausted eyes. "Reinforcements," he whispered. "Not from the fleet, but from home." And as a massive shadow descended from the heavens, larger than any dreadnought they had seen so far, the humans all stood taller, straighter, hearts burning again with new fire. The sky above Varnes 5 changed in a way no one on the planet had ever seen before, not during storms, not during invasions, not even during the arrival of the first Terran dreadnought fleet. This time the sky didn't just darken or flicker. It bent, twisted, and vibrated as if reality itself was being pulled apart. And the massive shadow descending from the heavens felt like something far older and far more powerful than any warship ever built. Every human soldier stopped fighting for a single heartbeat, their exhausted bodies straightening naturally as if their muscles recognized the sound before their minds did. And a whisper of raw emotion rippled through their ranks, a rare moment of unity that came not from discipline, but from memory and pride. Even the Terran commander, barely conscious, barely breathing, blood staining his armor, lifted his head with trembling awe as the colossal shadow broke through the clouds. The Varnes defenders squinted upward, their hearts pounding as the shape grew clearer. It wasn't sleek like the smaller dreadnoughts, it wasn't sharp like the Council's cruisers, and it wasn't monstrous like the Scar warships. It was ancient, scarred, enormous, and moved with the heavy, deliberate grace of something that had crawled through 1,000 wars and survived every one of them. And then the world finally saw it. The Sentinel of Terra, an ancient Earth warship so massive that it made the dreadnoughts look like small escorts, its armor thick and dark, covered in cracks and burn marks from battles older than the current generation of the galaxy. Blue runes glowed across its hull, old Terran code, written in a language no alien had ever translated. The Varnes defenders felt their knees weaken. Even the Execution Legion paused, confusion rippling through their ranks. But the humans, they stood taller, straighter, and for the first time since the battle began, something like hope flickered deep in their bruised eyes. The Sentinel emitted a single, thunderous pulse from its engines, a bass-like hum that vibrated through the ground so powerfully that dust fell from ruined buildings, loose metal rattled, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. A Terran soldier whispered into the comms with a trembling voice, "They sent the Sentinel? For us." Another soldier, her armor cracked and dripping blood, whispered back, "They never deploy her, unless something is truly wrong." And Lyra realized what that meant. The humans had not sent their biggest ship to win a battle. They had sent it because Varnes 5 mattered to them now. A bright white beam shot down from the Sentinel, slamming into the ground with a force that shook the valley, and as the smoke cleared, a second wave of Terran forces emerged. Not tired, not injured, not desperate like the first wave, but fresh, precise, deadly, their armor shining with new blue fire, their visors glowing with cold focus. These were not the soldiers who had crashed through fire and battled beasts. These were elites, Deathworlder veterans, warriors with scars deeper than worlds. And at their head walked a human unlike any Lyra had ever seen. Taller, broader, armor-plated with reinforced black metal, a glowing Terran emblem carved across his chest. His presence alone sent a shiver through both armies. Even the Execution Legion, creatures bred for extermination, stepped back involuntarily. His voice boomed across the battlefield, loud and steady. Terran High Vanguard reporting, "We are taking command of ground operations." The battered first-wave humans stiffened instinctively, standing at attention despite their wounds. Some swayed, some nearly collapsed, but every one of them saluted. The Vanguard leader approached the Terran commander, seeing the blood pouring from his armor. "You should not be standing," he said quietly. The commander, barely conscious, smiled through the pain. "My people needed me to." The vanguard leader placed a hand on his shoulder. A small, quiet gesture, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. "Rest now," he said. "We finish this." The vanguard turned to face the execution legion, and his expression changed. His jaw tightening, visor glowing brighter, posture shifting from commander to predator. The execution legion roared and charged forward, thousands of soldiers rushing like a tidal wave of steel and death. But this time, the humans didn't retreat, didn't struggle to hold the line. They advanced. Hard, fast, without fear. The new Terran forces hit the Legion with the force of a hurricane. Their rifles fired beams that cut through multiple enemies at once. Their blades sliced through scar armor like paper. Their shields absorbed so much energy that the ground beneath them glowed red. The battle transformed instantly. Where the humans had previously fought to survive, now they fought to dominate. And dominance was something Deathworlders understood intimately. Lyra watched in disbelief as one vanguard soldier grabbed an execution warrior by the spine and threw him into a burning crater. Another punched through a Scar's chest with impossible strength, while a third carried a wounded Varney soldier behind cover before returning to the battlefield with twice the fury. The sentinel above joined the fight, its railgun spinning, charging, and firing rounds so powerful they created miniature shockwaves that obliterated entire clusters of the execution legion. Yet even in this overwhelming display of power, the humans fought with purpose, not cruelty. When an execution warrior tried to use a Varney's child as a shield, the vanguard leader did not fire. He sprinted across the battlefield, caught the monster by the throat, broke its arm, grabbed the child, and only then delivered the killing blow. The humans were terrifying. But they were not heartless. They were guardians first. Still, the cost of the battle weighed on them. Even with reinforcements, even with the sentinel, the battlefield was heavy with the grief of the fallen. Human soldiers stepped over the broken bodies of their brothers, their faces twisted in pain but eyes still burning with resolve. One soldier paused beside the corpse of his friend, his shoulders shaking. But when he heard the vanguard call, he rose again, wiping his tears, firing at the enemy without missing a beat. Lyra felt her heart twist. How could a species fight with such pain and still call it strength? How could they carry such heavy hearts and still charge forward? The answer came from the Terran commander himself. Barely conscious on the ground, he whispered through cracked lips, "Because the living owe it to the dead to finish the fight." Those words spread through the comms like wildfire, igniting something deep inside each Deathworlder. Their movements sharpened, their voices steadied, their strikes grew stronger. And as the battle reached its peak, the vanguard leader lifted his glowing blade toward the execution legion and roared, "For Terra! For the fallen! For the call we answered!" The battle should have ended with the arrival of the Terran vanguard and the Sentinel of Terra. Yet even as the execution legion began to collapse under the overwhelming fury of the humans, the sky above Varney's 5 twisted once more, not in the blue shimmer of Terran warp signatures but in a sickly red spiral that spread across the horizon like a bleeding wound, and the air turned cold, so cold that breath became frost and even the flames on the battlefield dimmed as if terrified of what was coming. The Varney's defenders felt dread crawl up their spines. The surviving humans tightened their ranks, weapons raised, their bodies shaking not from fear but from the instinctive awareness that something older, darker, and far more dangerous had entered the war. Even the Terran commander, barely conscious, forced his eyes open and whispered hoarsely, "No, not them, not here." Nobody understood what he meant until the red spiral cracked open like the shell of a dying star and an enormous Scar War construct emerged, far larger than the champion beast, far more sinister than the execution legion, its entire body made of fused armor plates, glowing veins, and screaming mechanical faces carved into its surface. It moved not on legs, but on a shifting mass of metallic tendrils that crushed the ground beneath it with every step, and its presence radiated something so suffocating that even the elite humans took a single step back. The Scar Dominion had sent their warlord engine, a weapon of final annihilation, a living machine built to erase worlds, designed for one purpose: extinction. The vanguard leader's face hardened beneath his helmet as he stepped forward, his blue visor glowing brighter than before. "All Terran units," he commanded, his voice echoing like thunder. Form defensive line Delta. Civilians behind the shield wall. No one retreats. His soldiers obeyed instantly, forming a wall of cracked armor and unwavering resolve. Even as the Warlord engine unleashed a roar that split the sky into vibrating shards of red energy. The Execution Legion, who moments ago fought with fanatical pride, fell to their knees in worship, bowing to their god machine. The humans didn't bow. They braced. The Warlord engine opened its chest, revealing 3 massive energy cores spinning violently, each one glowing with enough power to vaporize cities. Lyra's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. "It's going to destroy the planet," she whispered. "It's not here to win the war. It's here to end it." A Varnese officer dropped his rifle in despair. "We're doomed." But the Vanguard leader turned to face them with the calm authority of someone who had seen the end of worlds and refused to accept them. "Not while we breathe," he said quietly. The Warlord engine struck first. A massive beam of red energy shot toward the humans, vaporizing the ground in a straight line. Terran shields flared blue, absorbing the strike but nearly collapsing from the force, several humans being thrown backward, armor cracking open like eggshells. Lyra ran to help them, but a Terran medic grabbed her shoulder, shaking his head. "Help your own. We'll help ours." His voice trembled not from fear, but from sorrow, from knowledge. Humans knew many of them wouldn't survive the next few minutes. The Vanguard charged. Every remaining Terran soldier surged forward with desperate strength, firing, slashing, screaming battle cries that echoed with grief and determination. The Warlord engine swung its tendrils, smashing humans aside like scattered dolls. A Terran heavy gunner was grabbed midair and crushed with horrifying ease, blood splattering across shattered metal. But even as their comrades died, the humans didn't falter. They climbed onto the Warlord engine's limbs, stabbing their blades between armor plates, firing point-blank into glowing weak spots, sacrificing themselves to expose vulnerabilities for others. One soldier detonated his own armor battery, blowing off an entire tendril but sending himself flying into the rubble. Another fired his rifle until the barrel melted, then picked up a fallen Scar weapon and continued fighting with raw fury. The Vanguard leader reached the Warlord engine's chest, his blade glowing brighter with every strike. But as he climbed, the machine responded with a spike of crimson energy that pierced straight through his side, lifting him off the ground like a helpless puppet. Lyra screamed as she watched him dangle, his armor sizzling from the energy burn, his breath coming out in ragged gasps. But even impaled, the Vanguard leader gripped the spike with both hands and shouted into the comms, "Commander, now!" The Terran commander, lying on the ground surrounded by medics, forced himself up, every bone in his body screaming in agony. He raised a trembling hand toward the sky. The Sentinel of Terra responded instantly, its railguns rotating, charging, the air turning electric as the ancient warship prepared a shot that could break moons. Energy gathered at its cannon tips, glowing brighter, brighter, brighter. Then the Warlord engine fired its own beam upward, striking the Sentinel with raw force. The sky exploded in light. The Sentinel trembled. Its armor cracked. Its runes dimmed. But it didn't fall. Instead, it roared. A sound no machine should make. A sound of ancient rage. A sound that shook the planet. The Sentinel fired. The railgun round tore through the clouds, smashed into the Warlord engine's chest, and blew out one of its cores in a blinding burst of blue and red energy. The shockwave knocked everyone down. The machine staggered. The humans surged. The Vanguard leader, still impaled, broke the spike with a scream of pain that ripped through every comm link. He fell, landed hard, but rose again, stumbling, bleeding, refusing to collapse. The Terran commander limped to his side, the two men supporting each other like broken pillars refusing to fall. Together, they aimed their weapons at the flickering second core of the Warlord engine. When the Warlord engine finally collapsed in a storm of burning metal and dying red light, the battlefield of Varnese, 5 fell into a quiet so deep it felt unnatural, a silence heavy with smoke, blood, and ghosts. The wind, which had carried screams and explosions all day, now moved gently across the ruins, as if afraid to disturb the broken warriors who lay scattered across the valley. Human survivors, those who could still stand, moved slowly through the wreckage, lifting the wounded, covering the fallen, whispering quiet goodbyes to brothers and sisters who would never rise again. Their armor, once glowing with Terran blue light, now flickered weakly, dimmed by damage and exhaustion. Yet even in their broken state, they didn't look defeated. They looked unshakable. Lyra stood among them, trembling as she watched the Terran commander and the vanguard leader, both barely alive, both covered in dried blood, inspect the remains of the warlord engine. The commander placed his hand on the broken core, feeling the fading heat. "It's over," one Varnese soldier whispered behind him. But the commander slowly shook his head, his voice low and heavy. "No. This was only the beginning." The words froze everyone. The ground beneath the warlord engine's corpse was still hot, still vibrating with faint pulses. Strange symbols, scar markings, glowed weakly through the cracks. Lyra stepped closer, confusion squeezing her chest. What does that mean? If the machine is dead, shouldn't the Dominion retreat? The vanguard leader let out a pained breath, his hand pressing on his bleeding side. Machines like this are not built for single battles. These cores, they are beacons. Lyra's eyes widened. Beacons? For what? The commander looked at the sky with an expression she had never seen on a human face. Not fury, not grief, but a cold, quiet fear. For whoever controls the Dominion now, someone far worse than this. Before anyone could respond, the Sentinel of Terra emitted a deep, low hum, an alert signal used only in the darkest moments of Terran history. The Dreadnoughts shifted position instinctively, surrounding the planet with a protective barrier, their engines igniting again even though the battle was over. Terran engineers scrambled, checking scanners with shaking hands. A medic rushed to the commander. "Sir, your chest is fractured. Your organs?" But he pushed her away gently, forcing himself to stand straight. "Report." A young Terran technician swallowed hard as his screen flickered with impossible readings. "Sir, we detected a transmission. Not from the Dominion. From deeper space." The commander frowned. "How deep?" The technician's voice cracked. "Sir, beyond mapped space. Beyond council borders. Beyond everything." The battlefield grew colder. The Sentinel's AI voice echoed across the comms, ancient and emotionless. "Incoming signal. Unknown origin. Unknown language. Unknown power signature. Probability. Catastrophic." Varnese soldiers stared in confusion, but the humans understood immediately. Humanity had not just answered an SOS. They had triggered something the galaxy had long forgotten. The vanguard leader walked to the commander, each step heavy, each breath sharp with pain. "We need to leave," he said quietly. "Not because we fear them, but because we need time. Time to prepare." The commander exhaled slowly, looking over the battlefield. The dead humans, the wounded aliens, the smoking ruins, the broken machine gods. "We don't abandon those we saved," he whispered. "We finish what we start." The vanguard leader placed a hand on his shoulder. "We will return, but we must regroup. If that signal reaches the Scar High Command, the Dominion will not send soldiers next time. They will send extinction." Lyra stepped forward, tears in her eyes, fear tightening her voice. "Then what are we supposed to do? We can't survive another battle like this. We barely survived this one." The commander turned to her, not with softness, but with the brutal honesty of a deathworlder. "You train, you rebuild, and you stand with us." Lyra swallowed. "With the deathworlders?" The commander nodded slowly. "The galaxy has spent centuries fearing us. Now they will need us." The humans moved quickly. Terran engineers activated portable shield domes around the Varnese civilians. Medics treated both human and alien wounded side by side. The Sentinel lowered smaller craft to transport the fallen Terrans for a warrior's burial. Not a single human body was left behind. Deathworlders didn't abandon their own, even in death. As the Sentinel prepared to ascend, the commander, barely able to stand, turned to the Varney's survivors. "Your SOS reached us once," he said, his voice rough and tired. "It will reach us again." A child stepped forward, the same child saved by the young Terran soldier who died shielding him. He held the cracked Terran dog tag in his small hands, eyes full of grief. Will you come back?" he whispered. The commander knelt painfully, taking the dog tag and placing it gently around the boy's neck. "We never ignore a call," he said. "Not from friends." The Sentinel engines roared, shaking the mountains. The Dreadnoughts lifted, forming a massive Terran formation in the sky, their hulls glowing faintly with renewed purpose. But just before warp ignition, a final message appeared across every Terran screen, a translation of the mysterious signal intercepted by the Sentinel.